Oh my gosh. As usual, no, this ain't planned. Okay? This is not planned. Now, I'm sitting here watching Dane Calloway's video. Things are not always what they appear to be. Okay? And I'm just, man, bro, like the father done already showed me how this government, and what they set up was, set up in a way, it was systematic racism at the get, okay? From the worst of the heathen that came over here. Now, the father had already shown me, many connections to how this was prophecy fulfilled in these lands over here, okay? Now I'm hearing it on Dane Calloway's video, okay? How this was literally the worst of the heathen that came over here to these lands, set up their government, okay? And, you know, put us into subjection, okay? And then set up their government. And they had power from the queen, okay? They had power with the papal bulls and all of these things, okay? They had power of the Pope and the King and Queen of England, okay? This is the confederacy that they had. Your Psalms 83, okay? But we're going to get into it. Let me just go ahead and play this. Now, I'm starting at around 50-54, okay? But I'm pretty sure I can talk about so much on this video, all right?
They tried to adapt this land and make it their own. So they renamed certain areas, like James City was referring to King James. James River is referring to King James because he was the one that wrote the charter that allowed for the missionaries to come over here to preach the gospel in order to decimate our people's literacy and to quell people from revolting against the intruders. They were intruders. But a lot of them didn't survive, and you're going to read that in my book. I'm going to tell you, I'm talking about wave after wave after wave of them, or those foreigners, were dying. In fact, I mentioned this in one of my documentaries. I'm going to bring this up. I told you guys that to go back to Britain and England and the rest of them, one of the major forms of punishment was called the Bloody Code. The Bloody Code consisted of their prisoners being sent to transportation. Transportation meant that they were sending their prisoners to a totally different continent, a totally different country, and a totally different continent as a punishment.
Now, I have a video that I did a little while back, not too long ago, but man, I done put out so much information in such a short amount of time. I just counted them today. I think it was like 40-something videos in about a month, okay? Now, that's a lot of information in a short amount of time, okay? But within a month's time, I'm pretty sure I put out a video about how they came over here to these lands, the worst of the heathen, okay? I had said something about how it was in one of my videos, and I said something like how it was the worst of the worst, the vagabonds or something like that. I don't really know that term, but you know what I mean. Vagabond, you know, the worst of the worst, the scoundrels, the true freaking scum of the earth, okay? This is the true scum of the earth that came over here that's ruling this government right now, okay? They done set themselves up in authority over us, okay? The stranger that is within you will get up above you very high, and thou shalt come down very low, okay? This is biblical. This is prophecy that these Gentiles fulfilled over here in these lands, okay? The worst of the heathen, all right? Let me go ahead and continue.
In fact, that's still ongoing. That's just not being talked about. But a lot of those people came over here as prisoners of another country and another continent.
See, I told you this. I told you this on one of my videos where I was talking about Christopher Columbus, okay, and on how a lot of his crew were criminals, okay. This was the worst of their people that they were sending into the so-called New World, okay, to pillage. Why do you think that they were looking for gold, bro? They were freaking poor. They were destitute. They came from very destitute situations, okay? And when they got over here and seen paradise and seen our people, they just hated us, bro. They had a perpetual hatred for us and how we could be living so good on such lush land, and they coming from literal slums, okay? Like, bruh, oh my gosh, I can really get into it, man. I'm not trying to hurt nobody's feelings, okay? But the truth gotta come out. These people didn't even bathe. They didn't know how to bathe, okay? They were filthy, and they were just the scum of the earth, okay? But now today, it's the so-called Negro that is the scum of the earth, all right? That is how we are looked at. And many of my people have literally become the scum of the earth. They don't want to rise above the brainwashing and the subjection that they have been placed in. They've had their mind placed under subjection, and they don't want to take it back. They're complacent in it. Okay, let me go ahead and continue.
And the census considered them free whites over here until they made their own government and was recognized by who? Another country in another continent. So if they just became a government and civilized themselves later on, we talking about 1850s, by the way, then who were here before they were?
We were here before they were. These were our lands, and we were happy on these lands. Some of us was living at peace in these lands. Some of us was very peaceful, okay? Some of us was keeping the law, statutes, and commandments of the Great Spirit. That's what he was called over here. Many of the ancients called the all power of love and life the Great Spirit, okay? It doesn't matter what you call them. You know, as long as you keep his law of love, okay? Love towards him or her, them, okay? Love towards the all power, male and female. We got a mother and father, higher power, okay? Your earthly mother feeds you. This is a higher power. She nourishes you. Okay, you come out of her. We are of the earth. We are elements of the earth. Okay, so when you die, you're gonna go back to the earth. You have an earthly mother that nourishes you your whole entire life, and you have a spiritual father. Okay, a heavenly father. All right. That created you, okay? Bruh, it's deeper than surface level, and you gotta have a hunger for truth in order to get truth. You have to be hungry for truth, okay? And not complacent with the things that you've been taught to believe all of your life. Okay, now this is connecting to prophecy. Dane Calloway ain't no religious dude whatsoever, okay? But he does believe in the Great Spirit. He knows that he's been created, but he rarely talks about the Great Spirit. He brings across truthful information, okay? He brings about the information that you need in order to elevate your mind, okay? Now the things that he's bringing out connects to the scripture that the Father has led me to by way of the Spirit, okay? Not only does it connect to the scripture that the Father led me to, but it also connects to all of these historical books that the Father has led me to, okay? That I have, all right?
How did they establish themselves if they were that poor? We talking about poor immigrants. They couldn't do that on their own.
They were the worst of the heathen that came out of the slums over here to the promised land. The promised land given to Shem, given to Israel, okay? These are our lands, okay? And they came over here, the worst of the heathen, the scum, the freaking worst, okay? The absolute worst, the trash of the Europeans, okay? The trash of the Gentiles, all right? These were the ones that the rest of the Gentiles looked down upon. You looked down upon them at that time, okay? This is why you sent them over to other lands. You transported your worst of the worst, your garbage, you sent over here, okay? And then when they got themselves together, raped, robbed, murdered, and plundered everything of us, murdered us, and built their cities upon our blood, then you established them. You made covenants with them. You went ahead and established them as a nation, okay? You established them as the United States of America, all right? As they set up their own government and their own laws over here. These foreigners that came over to our land, okay? And now we, to this day, are still in subjection to these people while we live in poverty. I have $11 in my bank account and $8 on my Cash App. Okay? This is my reality. That is all the money that I got to my name. Plus 80 cents in change. Okay? Not counting the pennies.
They were the worst of worst criminals being sent out. They kept their prisons were overpopulated. They kept their selected prisoners.
They felt as though prisoners should be sent to a new world. That's why they called it a new world. They wanted them out of their surroundings. Yes, the Iroquois Confederacy helped them. Now they copied us. Now let me word that properly, because they thought that they were going to get something out of the deal by helping them. But we already had our confederates, or confederations, yes, joined our confederations. We already had our confederations because we were the Confederates. We had our confederations.
So they joined our confederations. This is what they did. They infiltrated us, and then they took us down from the inside.
We were in control. We had our own Congress. We had everything prior to them coming here. So in order for them to be adopted into our way of living or civilization, they had to become accustomed to what we were doing. So what you see now, not now as far as all the negativity, but what you see now as far as a relationship with the government is concerned, by way of its people, we already had prior to these foreigners' arrival. There were tribes that were together as confederations, not nations, confederations. The nations are infiltrations because the government is at the top versus the people being at the top.
Federation.
We were the original Confederates. We had our own armies. We had our own flags. This was prior, and y'all saw that video. I don't got to go back over it. They just got started. They literally just got started. It wasn't that long ago. The 1850s is when they really got started. And by the time they implemented white supremacy in the 1890s is when the ball was rolling. And they were hitting jump shot after jump shot.
That's like 40 years. 40 years. You know, they came over here, raped, robbed, murdered, steal, killed, plundered, destroyed our people, built their towns upon our blood. Oh, we gonna get into it. We're gonna get into it. Cause all of you self-righteous Gentiles out there, you Europeans, you think that this is hate speech. You think that all of this is just dogging white people. No, we telling the truth about what truly happened and why we're in the situation that we're in. Because it's hella deep. It ain't because we're lazy. Because I don't want to slave for you. You are the CEOs pretty much of everything in these lands. You own everything. The scripture did not lie when it said that we would have to go to our enemies for all of our want and needs. This is exactly what we have to do to this day.
And it was working. It was not that long ago, y'all. But the reason why I'm mentioning that is because if they can do it, we can do it. We can do it.
Once.
We did it once. We can do it again.
Right, exactly.
But we did it more than once.
True.
We did it more than once because all of the so-called Black Wall Streets, now it was more than one. It was multiple ones. Of the so-called Black Wall Streets proved that we will outdo this government. And they got so jealous that they started redlining our businesses.
There you go.
With U.S. interstates to keep them in the interstate. That's a big word, interstate. Going back to the use of their language. They cast the spells off of what they're saying. They're keeping themselves in the interstate, the U.S. interstate. Redlined all of our businesses and got rid of them.
You want to tell me that that's not systematic racism? Not to mention, every time that we made a success of ourselves, what did you do? What did you do to Black Wall Street over here in Tulsa and all the other Wall Streets? Didn't you not bomb it? Didn't you not destroy our businesses? Didn't you not kill our people? Didn't you not commit great genocide on us? Did you not do this, white people?
And killed the people that tried to do anything to their militia. But that was when they had the power to do that. The reason why they had the power to do that is because they made them go to war first, get themselves upset, so when they come back and notice that the government wasn't going to do nothing for them, but they saw how the Needy was living, that was going to make them jealous. So the government allowed them to take back home property of the military. Y'all heard what I said? To use it against us because they knew they were going to get mad. They funded both sides of the war. I know you heard that before.
Oh, yeah.
They funded both sides of the war.
Did you see that lady in the courthouse? That's one of the survivors? Trying to take him to court?
Yeah, I put that on my channel also. I think she was 94 years old. But she got
that judge, the other one that was appealing it, man, he was a prick.
All of them were, because it's not just him, it's the governor too. The governor was in, they being petty in Oklahoma. Now, but the thing is that I got, and I'm not going mention a lie, but I got some folks in Oklahoma getting ready to put back up the Wall Street. And they know I got their back. Anything they need, I got them. But we need to have our back. And this is the main reason why I created this 13%. This is just the start. I started the 13% server so we can have conversations off of stuff like this. We can have these conversations safe over here. And we can really get some things done. So if you're serious, click the button. If you got suggestions, mention it. If you got something to do, or you want something to do, listen, say it. Say it. That's not fair that we're allowing this government to take control over us when this government shouldn't be here.
Now, they came over here. Now, this was prophecy. Now, the Father said, if we did not turn from our wicked ways, that the worst of the heathen were going to come over here. And that they were going to enter into our towns, our homes, that they were going to remove us from the Trail of Tears was prophesied to happen, okay? This was our people. When you watch documentaries of the Trail of Tears, they're showing you a depiction of pale-skinned people or Mongol-looking people, but that was not who it was. That was your so-called Negro. Man, bro, I ain't gonna stay on here. Like I said, this was not planned. I just wanted to get that little bit. I'm like, bro, you can't tell me that this is not systematic racism. As a matter of fact, while I'm thinking about it, hold on, let's go ahead and get this right quick. Hold on, because I came across this the other day. Give me a second. And I'm not going to stay on here, but I do want to get this right quick. Now this is from the Real News Network. How government policy created white wealth and concentrated so-called African American poverty. Okay, this is part 2.
You also talk about how when this segregation was implemented through public housing and other policies, it also further exacerbated the conditions in the pre-existing slums where many African Americans lived. Can you talk about the mechanism of that occurring?
Sure. I apologize. It's going to be a long answer. It's a bit complicated, but let me try and make it as brief as I can. I have to introduce it by telling you that another major federal program that the federal government implemented during World War II and afterwards, during the New Deal, was the Federal Housing Administration's program to create white subdivisions, white suburbs surrounding central cities across the country. And they built suburbs by guaranteeing loans to mass production builders of suburbs to, on condition that those homes only be sold to white families, that no African-American people live to buy homes. So, for example, the best known example perhaps is Levittown, east of New York City, where Levitt built 17,000 homes in the late 1940s and early 1950s, which he could never have assembled the capital to build on his own. Instead, the federal government guaranteed bank loans to Levitt to build that suburb on condition we sell no homes to African Americans. And in addition, the federal government required that he put a clause in every deed in Levittown that prohibited resale to African. Well, this went on all across the country, and the mass suburbanization of the country California, the biggest example of subdivisions built all over California on explicit condition set by the federal government that no homes be sold to African Americans. Once this was done, the civilian housing then became available again. There had been a big shortage before the 50s because no civilian housing was built during the war because building materials weren't permitted to be used for civilian construction. And there was a big housing backlog even before the war because of the Depression. So when civilian housing construction began again in the 1950s, and the Federal Housing Administration subsidized whites to move into these all-white suburbs, explicitly all-white by federal requirement, the whites began to abandon the inner cities and abandon the public housing, which had been primarily designed for them before that time. There was public housing beginning in the mid-1950s for white projects, and there were many, many more projects for whites at that time than there were for African Americans. White projects began to have large vacancies. Black projects had long waiting lists, and the reason was simply that the federal government was subsidizing whites to leave cities. Well, industry then began to leave cities as well. And so the African Americans who were living in public housing became poorer and poorer. Jobs disappeared, and African Americans weren't able to gain the wealth that housing ownership created. So these policies resulted in greater poverty of the African American population.
And see, now, what can you Europeans say about that? What can you say about that? Because this is a fact. This happened. And as you heard, this was 1940s, 1950s, okay? We weren't allowed to buy the houses, okay? White people could buy these houses for $8,000 or so, all right? Well, we were forced to pay rent in apartments, in apartment complexes, okay? Public housing, all right? We were forced to pay rent and utilities and all these things, so we didn't get to build up economic wealth like the Europeans got to do. So all you self-righteous Europeans today, which are $100,000 worth of equity of your home, you make lots of money with that, but you got a huge helping hand. You got a huge, running start with that. Okay, so you self-righteous Europeans, this is what irritates me today with you self-righteous Europeans on these lands that were stolen by your forefathers. But you're getting to live it up. You're living it up lavishly on these lands while you look your nose down at the indigenous people that were already here that you've been taught came here from Africa on slave ships. You've been fed lies. So you think that you're all entitled and you all self-righteous and high and mighty looking down on us, but you have no idea what kind of hole you dug for yourself. Because there's going to be retribution for this, which is right around the corner.
And I wanted to ask you specifically about that, because this really isn't only about residential segregation. As you just mentioned, it really is about the wealth that government policies created for white families that black families did not have access to. So when you look at the racial wealth disparities, the racial wealth gap today, you really trace it to these housing policies that started in the New Deal and that continued in the decades after. Can you really give us a picture of that?
Sure. Well, let me go back to that example I gave a minute ago. And
hold on, before I let him break that down. And by the way, this dude look Jewish. Okay, this is a European that's telling you this factual history. Okay. Now hold on. All right, so-called black and Latino two-parent families have half the wealth of white single parents, okay? This was posted February 8th of 2017, okay? From an Adrian Floridu. Now, I don't have the screenshot to this yet. I guess I can go ahead and take one right quick. Give me a second. Like I said, I didn't plan this audio one bit. And while I'm doing this screenshot, this gonna be a side note. It's so crazy, man. Earlier today, I was I don't know if she deleted me. I guess she did, maybe. But this was somebody that I thought was a dear sister, you know, like one of the very few people that I chat with from time to time and have her phone number. We spoke on the phone a few times, you know. And anyway, she up and blocked me today from just, you know, commenting on her post. I don't understand, you know, like, this is not the way that the Messiah told us to treat one another. And I thought that this was I thought she was righteous, you know. But, and truth be told, now I'm not going to tell you her name, because I'm going to be real about, you know, some things. Because the Father placed it upon my spirit to give her warnings about her behavior and how she is speaking to people, and, you know, just this air of self-righteousness, you know, and how she is bashing our people for being stiff-necked. Okay, now, I talk about our people being stiff-necked all the time, and I speak by way of the Spirit, you know, as the Father gives utterance about the judgment that is coming for those of my bloodline that are stiff-necked to this day. But that's one thing. That's what the Father called us to do. But he never once called us to cuss people out. He never once called us to call people out their name and bash them and put them down. What I'm doing is not bashing anybody. I tell you the word of the Most High, whether you want to receive it or not. That's your choice. I don't get mad at you because you don't want to accept the word of the Most High. But that's the difference. I noticed that she would get mad. She would get angry at our brothers and sisters that, you know, were stiff-necked and refused to accept the word of the Most High. We can't force people. It's their choice. We've all been given free agency. Now let me go ahead and save this. That's absolutely crazy, right? So-called black. See, and this is another thing that really irritates me. It's all of these articles that they put out with their labels on us, okay? Their stigmas and their labels that they placed upon us as a people. We are not black, okay? Now, one of these days, I'm going to go over the etymology of the word black. It is not good to call yourself black, okay? First of all, we were never known as so-called black people, okay? And our skin is not black. It's copper color, okay? Now, our two-parent families have half the wealth of white single parents.
Trace it to these housing policies that started in the New Deal.
Now, this right here. In D.C., white families are on average 81 times richer than so-called black ones. Go ahead and get the screenshot right quick.
That continued in the decades after. Can you really give us a picture of that?
Sure. Well, let me go back.
Let me get this one too. Now, this was posted March 26, 2015. Okay? Laura Shin. Alright? The racial wealth gap. Why a typical white household has 16 times the wealth of a black one. Says the United States is becoming much more racially and ethnically diverse. At the same time, it's becoming more unequal in terms of wealth and income. These two trends are combining in an uncomfortable way. The wealth and income divide is happening along racial and ethnic lines. The typical black household now has just 6% of the wealth of the typical white household. Okay, I can't read no more of it. Go ahead and get the screenshot of this. No, I don't want to stay on here too much longer. Now, let me go ahead and finish this right quick.
Sure. Well, let me go back to that example I gave a minute ago of Levittown, which is the most famous of these suburbs. These 17,000 homes east of New York City. Those homes sold in the late 1940s and early 1950s for about $8,000, $9,000 a piece. In today's dollars, that's about $75,000 to $100,000. And as I mentioned, only whites could buy it. There were many, many African Americans who couldn't afford it to buy homes in Levittown. $100,000 in today's dollars is about twice national median income. Working class families can afford to buy a home at twice national median income, African Americans as well as whites. But African Americans were prohibited. Instead, African Americans were living in cities and renting apartments. Whites were able to buy these homes. Well, today, homes in Levittown sell for $300,000, $400,000. That's 7-8 times national median income. Unaffordable to working class families, to lower middle class families, whether they're white or black. So the white families who were able to buy into these suburbs that were created all over the country by the federal government, whites only, gained $200,000, $300,000 in equity appreciation for the next 2 generations. African Americans who were forced to only rent apartments because they were not permitted to live in the suburbs gained none of that equity appreciation. In the United States, most wealth of middle-class families is attributable to the equity they have in their homes. So today, nationwide, African American income are about 60% of white incomes. But African American wealth is only 5% of white wealth on average. And that enormous disparity, the difference between the 60% income ratio and the 5% wealth ratio, is almost entirely attributable to unconstitutional federal housing policy that was practiced in the mid-20th century.
Now, if that does not convince you that this government was set up in order to keep us down and white people on top, then I don't know what will. Maybe you just meant to stay blinded. Maybe you just meant to stay deceived. Shalom.